Hello, Dr. Kissinger. Greetings from Geneva, and I should say from Davos. Do you hear us?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Yeah, no, you have here a great assembly, everybody interested in hearing your views, and I don't have to introduce you, Dr. Kissinger. I just would like to mention that I met you when I was at Harvard over 50 years ago, and actually you came to Davos the first time. It was in 2080, so over 40 years ago, and I looked at your speech which you gave in 1980, and I just want to quote one or two things. In your speech you focused, and I quote, "The constantly changing world." Does it sound familiar? And then you said, and I quote, "the age of global interdependence," end of quote. And you warned of a, I quote, "of a delusion of confidence in classic models, a challenge to the system," and you concluded your speech by saying, "All of those changes are global and would make ours a period of turmoil, even apart from any specific challenge that we have to face." 1980. And now we are 42 years, 42 years later. And of course, we are all very keen to hear how you assess the situation of today. And I had the pleasure to visit you just some weeks ago, and we have chosen, as I mentioned to you at that time, history at a turning point. We are really at a turning point. And this is not a speech, this is a conversation of, I would say, a young student and an experienced professor. So first question to you, Henry, is if you listen to the theme, history at a turning point, would you describe the new world which may evolve after this turning point, which we are living through at this moment?
First of all, let me thank you for permitting me to return to Davos, because it is such a crucial forum for the exchange of ideas from all over the world. The outcome of this turning point is not yet obvious, because there are a number of issues which are still under consideration within the realm of the decision makers, and of course many evolutions that are going on that will affect the outcome. Let me sketch the issues. The most vivid at the moment is the war in Ukraine. And the outcome of that war, in both the military and political sense, will affect relations between groupings of countries, which I will mention in a minute. On the outcome of any war has a peace settlement, but the nature of that peace settlement will determine whether the combatants remain permanent adversaries or whether it's possible to fit them into an international framework. About 8 years ago, when the idea of membership of Ukraine in NATO came up, I wrote an article in which I said that the ideal outcome would be if Ukraine could be constituted as a neutral kind of state, as a bridge between Russia and Europe, rather than as the front line of groupings within Europe. I think that opportunity does not now exist in the same manner, but it could still be conceived as an ultimate objective. In my view, a movement towards negotiations and negotiations on peace need to begin the next 2 months or so. That the outcome of the war should be outlined by them before it creates upheavals and tensions that could be even harder to overcome. And particularly between the eventual relationship of Russia towards Europe and of Ukraine towards Europe. Ideally, the dividing line should return to the status quo ante. I believe pursuing the war beyond that point would turn it into a war not about the freedom of Ukraine, which has been undertaken with great cohesion by NATO, but into a war against Russia itself. And so this seems to me to be the dividing line, that it is just and possible to define, and it will be difficult. Any modification of that occurs during the negotiations, which of course have not yet been established, but which should begin to be the concern of the major participants as the war develops. And I have given outline of a possible military outcome, but one has to keep in mind that any modification of that will complicate the negotiations, in which Ukraine has a right to be a significant participant, but in which one hopes that they match the heroism that they have shown in the war with wisdom for the balance that has in Europe and in the world afterwards. The relationship that will develop as a result of this war, not between Ukraine, which will be probably the strongest conventional power on the continent, and and the rest of Europe will have to be developed over a period of time. But one has to look at the relationship of Europe to Russia over a longer period, and in a manner that is separated to some extent from the existing leadership, whose status, however, will be affected internally over a period of time by its performance in this period. But looked at from a long-term point of view, Russia has been for 400 years an essential part of Europe, and European policy over that period of time has been affected fundamentally by its European assessment of the role of Russia, sometimes in a disturbing way, but on a number of occasions as the guarantor or the instrument by which the European balance could be re-established. We, in current policy, should keep in mind that a restoration of this goal is Europe, so that Russia is not driven into a permanent alliance with China or the Japanese. But European relations with are not the key element, are not the only key element of this altered and upward picture. Russia and the China and the United States will, over the next years, have to come to some definition of how to conduct the long-term relationship. The long-term relationship of countries, it depends on their strategic capacities, but also on their interpretation of these capacities. In recent years, China and the United States have evolved into a relationship that is unique in each side's history. That is, that they, from the point of view of strategic potential, they are the greatest threat to each other. In fact, the only military threat that each side needs to deal with continuously. And so the challenge, the period in which I was involved in the creation of this relationship, in which it was thought that a period of permanent collaboration might emerge of the two countries becoming acquainted, has been partly jeopardized and for the present period, probably terminated by the growth in the strategic and technical competence of each other. So on that level, there is an inherent adversarial aspect. Now the challenge is whether this adversarial aspect can be mitigated progressively eased by the diplomacy that both sides conduct, and it cannot be done unilaterally by one side. So both sides have to come to the conviction that some easing of the political relationship is essential, because they are in a position that has never existed before, namely that a conflict with modern technology conducted in the absence of any preceding arms control negotiations, so that there are no established criteria of limitations, will be a catastrophe for mankind, and that whatever their differences are within the context of historic politics, the leaders have an obligation to prevent this, and therefore, at a minimum, permanent consultations on this subject and serious consultations on this subject need to take place on a permanent basis. And that is one evolution of this. And of course, there are many unsettled periods, issues around the world. The emergence of additional nuclear powers, of which the most urgent is the rise of Iran and the consequent divisions in the Middle East, and as in the period ahead, not directly affected by the Ukrainian issue, but affected by the balance that will emerge, are the rise of countries like India and Brazil and other countries that will have to be integrated into an international picture. These seem to me to be the key issues, together with the fact that the Ukraine conflict has produced a rupture in the economic arrangements that have been made in the period before, so that the definition and operation of a global economic system will have to be reconsidered. These challenges I put forward as an analogy, but I believe they must be overcome if we are not going to live in an increasingly confrontational and chaotic world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kissinger, for this state of the world description. We have, and I know he's not prepared for it, but we have here someone sitting whom I most admire also for his ideas, and he just has also published a very significant book. So Graham Allison, would you be ready to comment, and we need a microphone, could you be ready to comment and maybe ask also Dr. Kissinger a final question? What is burning in your mind? But first, it would be interesting to have your comments.
Well, thank you very much.
I didn't get the name.
Your oldest student.
Graham Alison.
Graham Mountain.
No, Grey Mount, yeah.
I think Henry often refers to me as his oldest student and course assistant, and I tell him that's because I've been the slowest learner. So Henry, you're looking great, though Henry was supposed to be having a 99th birthday party tonight in New York, but the circumstances didn't permit. So I can see you're dressed up for the party in any case, and I'm sorry I'm missing you there, but it's good to see you here. Henry, your overview was, as always, wonderful, and I think Klaus did a good job in reminding us of the 1980 remarks, where we can hear echoes. In 1980, though, China hardly figured in the picture the way it does today. So as you look at the relationship between the US and China, which, as you say, is inevitably and inherently going to be rivalrous and adversarial, but at the same time, if unmanaged, may end in a catastrophic war. And as we watch what's happening in Taiwan, and just to be timely in terms of the news, the comment of President Biden yesterday in Japan about Taiwan. You and I have talked about this before. I think that seems to be about the fastest path to a general full-scale war between the US and China. So I wonder, how are you thinking about Taiwan in the context of the need for the constraints and rules of the road that you described the necessity for, but that we now see the absence of?
Henry, do you want to respond?
When football, it's an unexpected pleasure to see Greg appear to put this question. He was my student, and he's my friend. And we've sought along parallel lines over many decades. I negotiated the understanding on Taiwan at the very beginning of the US-Chinese relationship. There had been hundreds of meetings on that subject between Chinese and American diplomats, and they had always ended on the first day because the Chinese demanded the immediate turnover of Taiwan, and we insisted on the continuation and on the use of peaceful methods in achieving this objective. So I will not go through the process in which it was achieved, but my understanding of the agreement has been that the United States would accept the principle of one China, that we would not insist on a two-China solution. And expressed was prepared to live with a long period in which this process would work itself out, and in which we always understood that the United States was opposed and might resist a military solution to that problem. I believe that these principles enabled Taiwan to develop for 50 years as an autonomous democratic system. And I think it is essential that these principles be maintained, that the United States should not, by subterfuge or by a gradual process, develop something of a two-China solution, but that China will continue to exercise the patience that has been exercised up to now. A direct confrontation should be avoided, and Taiwan cannot be the core of the negotiations because between China and the United States. It is for the core of the negotiations. It is important that the United States and China discuss principles that affect the adversarial relationship and that permit at least some scope for cooperative efforts. The Taiwan issue will not disappear, but it is but as a direct subject of confrontation and adversarial conduct, it is bound to lead to a situation that may shape into the military field, which is against the world interest and against the long-term interest of China and the United States. And these are cautions I address to my friends in the American government, but also to the friends that over the years I have had an opportunity to negotiate with on the Chinese side. So it is important for the overall peace of the world, for the United States and China to mitigate their adversarial relationship by recognition that if a World War I type situation were to arise where people are sliding into a conflict, the consequences would be even more dire than they would be, than they were then. So how to manage between an existing adversarial relationship and the need for cooperation in the economic and political order is the big challenge for both governments, and it will be affected importantly because China will have to reanalyze the relationship it has established with Russia, because it could not have expected when it was made that it would evolve in the direction that it has. And it will also be important for the United States to go beyond the increased consciousness of adversarial relations into some concept of a world order in which the United States and China, partly due to the evolution of economies, partly due to the evolution of ideologies, are in a largely confrontation, and to see whether it and to move it, not just to see do it, but to do it do something that is compatible with world order.
Thank you, Henry. We are coming to an end of our session, and it was fascinating to hear your still very visionary perspectives and to hear from you the different scenarios. Thank you very much. I have a very unusual idea, and you may forgive me, but as we have heard also from Graham, Henry is celebrating his 99th birthday this week. So let's say all together, happy birthday to you, Henry. So happy birthday to you, Henry. And all the best, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have 1 minute, and I would like to use this minute because, Graham, you have written this book. Keep the microphone. You have written this book and arguing that if you take historical examples, a war between or competition which may end in a war, let's put it in this way, between the US and China is inevitable. May you just in some very few sentences share with the audience, do you still think this is the case too? Come.
So basically, I didn't come to speak, I came to listen to Henry, but this is an idea that emerged over some years. Henry uses history to help inform and illuminate the present and the choices and the challenges. In my book on Thucydides' trap, I look at the last 500 years. We find 16 cases in which a rapidly rising power, like Athens in classical Greece or Germany at the beginning of the 20th century, challenges a colossal ruling power, like Sparta or Great Britain or the US today. So 12 of those 16 end in war. So war is not inevitable, just it's been the way that things have happened.
Yeah.
And several people, since I've gotten here, have asked me, well, so what would Thucydides say now, since this book was written 5 years ago, just as Trump became president? And I think he would say both the rising power and the ruling power seem right on script, almost as if each is competing to see which can better exemplify the typical rising power and typical ruling power. So he's sitting on the edge of his seat, anticipating the grandest collision of all times. And I think,
but if we follow the advice of Henry,
that would be this one of the fifth of the four that escaped Thucydides' trap, as well as and rather than the 13th of the 12 that led to catastrophic outcomes.
Yeah. So Henry, you have given us very valuable advice, and thank you again, and thank you also, Graham. Thank you, Henry. We wish you all the best, and this concludes our session. Thank you very much.